Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Ben VanHook. Ben is an autistic public policy master's student at George Mason University. He's a recognized disability activist, content creator, writer, presenter, and speaker. So we are delighted to have you with us today. Ben, you're clearly already doing a lot, but tell us a bit about yourself in your own words, please, and then we can start quizzing you some more. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the show, and I really appreciate our conversation, and I'm really excited to really get into what advocacy means to me. To start out with, my name is Ben VanHook. I'm an autistic master's student at George Mason University. I have a background in public policy and psychology, and my goal is to bridge the gap between the theoretical and the practical and create tangible solutions for different barriers that are currently afflicting the autistic community, whether it's in employment, whether it's in the household, whether it's in education and the educational environments that autistic people are put in. So my goal is to really come up with these tangible solutions for these very important challenges that we're facing. I have an extensive record as to speaking at different organizations. I spoke at the United Nations World Autism Acceptance Day event in 2023 about disability policy. I spoke at the Global ADHD Summit in 2023 as well about strengths-based approaches to learning, as well as universal design for learning and the accommodations process. And I've spoken at several universities, from Stanford University to Johns Hopkins University, about the importance of universal design in the classroom. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So thank you, Ben. And it's really important that people who are neurodivergent get to have their own voice in these important fora. So, clearly you're raising that voice. So how did you come to be engaged in speaking at UN, for example? Because it's not that easy to get invites. We've had the pleasure ourselves, but it's a real privilege to be part of this. So what were the things that made you get noticed to participate in these conversations at that high level?
It was a huge honor to have been asked to speak at the United Nations. What helped me get noticed was telling my story over time about my experiences growing up as an Asian autistic individual and some of the barriers that I've encountered within my different intersections, whether it was making friends, whether it was different stigmas and stereotypes that I faced around being an Asian autistic. I also have posted a lot about my vision for the future of lowering the unemployment rate from 85%, of having more teacher trainings in autism and other disabilities so that we're informed about neurodiversity and physical disabilities and how to support us. I've also spoken about the importance of inclusion in research in different historically exclusive fields. And I've spoken about the importance of nothing without us and including us in every realm of society. So I think being able to share my vision for the future, as well as ways we can get there, was a really big factor in how I was chosen to speak at the United Nations in 2023.
Ben,
oh, sorry.
No, excuse me. Ben, welcome to the show. I love your work. I was very impressed when I started reading about your work and also reading your posts on LinkedIn. So thank you for being on the show today. One thing that I see hashtags like actually autistic. I also see a lot of sometimes debating, confusion in the autism community about who should actually be speaking for the autistic community. I personally, of course, believe that people with lived experiences with autism need to have their own voices and be speaking for themselves. But it still is sort of complicated because I know there's a lot of autistic groups, some of them, some members of the autism community like, some they don't. There seems to be a lot of controversy, but at the same time, I see consultants speaking for the community of people with autism, for example. And I think there's things that we know about including people with autism, but I think there's so much we do not really understand. Whereas if we would actually be speaking and learning and hiring consultants like you, Ben, we could actually understand the real needs of the community. But can you just talk to some of the confusion there is in the community?
Yeah, there's a lot. There, people in the community come from all different lived experiences, all different backgrounds, all different intersections, and they might have a different perspective on what is best for the community, how to go about solving some of the challenges that we face on a daily basis. Some of us encounter different challenges. For example, someone who's a high support needs person might have a different perspective than someone who is of a lower support needs. When it comes to autistic individuals. So I think it's important to recognize the different lived experiences. And I also think it's healthy. I think having this discourse, having these conversations, validating every experience, even if they don't align with our own, is very important, because it just helps us get more viewpoints out there, helps us consider things we might not have considered ourselves, and it helps us evaluate our own biases as autistic individuals, and it helps us begin to really support everyone in the community. I think the more viewpoints we have, the better. So I think a lot of this discourse and confusion can come down to different lived experiences, speaking on different issues. I also think oftentimes there are non-autistic people who tend to speak for the autistic community, which isn't really as helpful, because I agree with you. I think that autistic people deserve our own voice. We deserve to advocate for ourselves, and we deserve a seat at the table when it comes to decision making, when it comes to different policies and discussions revolving around our community, because we are the people who are going to be affected by these changes. And we are the only people who have really lived through the effects of these changes and who are going to live through the effects of these changes. So I think it's important that we're brought into the discussion, that we're brought into the conversation, and I think it's important that we're included in every realm of society.
Another point that you brought up, Ben, before we got on air, but why do you think it's so important for consultants that are actually autistic, or just using that hashtag, but to be also considered and included in research about people with autism, about neurodivergence, because I also see the community being excluded there as well.
It is very excluded in research. I've and there's a few reasons for that. One of them could be a lack of a master's degree. A lot of autistic people are struggling financially and might not have the means to go to college, or might not have the means to get a higher degree if they wanted to. Part of it is because of the bias and stigma around our capabilities and capacity. And there's also oftentimes a lack of professional development opportunities or growth opportunities within APA itself for autistic people. When it comes to different conventions and conferences, for example, they come with a very high entry fee. And that's not considering how much you're going to have to pay for airfare and hotels and all of that. A lot of these conferences and conventions and opportunities to connect with other autistic individuals and to connect with research as a whole are just gatekept from us because of finances and socioeconomic status. But I've done a lot of work with APA. I was the first ever autistic student representative at Division 33, Autism and Intellectual Disabilities, from 2021 to 2023. And I've seen more of a shift to CBPR, community-based participatory research, where they use the autistic community and work alongside the autistic community to get to understand us better. And we actually become a part of the research, not just as subjects, but as collaborators.
Excellent.
We become coders. We also become people who are heavily involved in the consulting process to make sure that we have a less biased or unbiased results and interpretation of the results. So the work that's being done in research currently is, I I think becoming more increasingly aware of the importance of using autistic consultants, and I've seen a little bit more of that throughout my work in APA and in research.
And I'll just remind everybody, please use our individuals with lived experience with autism, but pay them. Do not ask them to do it for free.
If you look at the topics that we recently observed in terms of disinvestment in diversity and inclusion, what are the topics that make you think and worry you?
I think inclusion is really important, and I'm worried that particularly autistic people of color are not really being seen or heard, and I'm worried that their voices are really being erased from the discussion around disability. So I am worried about only white autistics or only autistics with privilege speaking on behalf of the community, and this doesn't just go for race. Like similar to that, I'm worried about low support needs, autistics dominating the conversation instead of including more higher support needs, people within the decision-making process, the discussion around disabilities. So I'm worried about the voices of certain autistic populations going unheard or being erased from the public discourse.
Do you have any ideas and suggestions how we can overcome that?
I think one of the best ways we can overcome this is through including, like adding more seats to the table for disabled people of color. I think it's important to offer opportunities, offer discounts for autistic people of color to be a part of these conversations, especially as it relates to different different conferences and different conventions, because autistic people of color are least likely to afford these opportunities. I also think it's important to have an intersectional approach when it comes to different consulting work, and hiring a representative sample of disabled people to consult on your organization about DEI initiatives. I also think tying DEI and just seeing the overlap between the disability and other marginalized communities is really important, because I think we're stronger together than any community alone, and we should be united in standing up for the rights of all people. So I think including people of all different ethnicities, all different religions, all different abilities is really important when it comes to creating positive change for our community moving forwards.
So picking up on that point, Ben, because we were talking about privilege before we went on air, and you just mentioned the lack of access due to to some of these communities, but you also said, you're part of these communities, you're intersectional, etc., but you recognize your own privilege. And I think that this is the thing. Privilege isn't an on-off thing. So how do you communicate about that concept, and how do you sort of navigate the idea of privilege within your work? Yeah,
so that's privilege is honestly why I've gotten into disability advocacy work. I recognize my own privilege in having gone to school, in having gone to college, graduated with a degree. I recognize my own privilege in being employed. So what drives my work is making that a possibility and a probability for all people, not just me or a select few. So what drives my work is recognizing and addressing my own privilege. I've also acknowledged my own privilege in a few of my posts as well, and I hope that this can inspire others to look inwards and recognize what they do have that others might not have, and work together to find ways to ensure that all people have access to these opportunities.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. What's really interesting for me is sort of there's an assumption of my privilege. Now I do have plenty. I'm white, male, educated, all of the rest of it. But there's sometimes a temptation. I've had some conversations recently with people in the DEI profession that essentially we should be excluding people like me because of privilege, because we're white and male, and we're making way, rather than actually having a broader conversation, because there are things happening whereby we're sort of assigning a smaller part. It's like we've only got so much pie that we can give, so we're going to need to give it to someone that meets these criteria, or you can't work in diversity, Neil, because you're a man.
Yeah.
And we're focused on gender equity. Well, as a man, I can still support women having equality. I think that understanding of privilege and intersectionality needs to still increase significantly, because we can be both privileged and have membership of the community, if you like, because I'm dyslexic ADHD, so I have my own lived experience and some validity in there. What we shouldn't be doing is displacing other people that have an equal right to a place at that table. So I think that it's setting more places at the table is what we need to be doing, rather than deciding who gets to eat.
Yeah, we should be expanding the table. If you have 13 consultants, expand it to like 20, 21 consultants. I think because you're right, white males are also a part of the community, so their voices also need to be heard. I think the more voices, the more ethnicities, and the more backgrounds we can hear from, the better the sample would be, because it's more representative of what the community face. And I also think it's important because the more communication we have, even if we come from, especially if we come from different backgrounds, is the more we'll be able to understand each other, communicate, and really come to an understanding with each other. I think communication is really important in advocacy, especially when it comes to intersectionality. So expanding the table to include white people, Black people, Asian people, Hispanics, Latino people is really important, so we can all work together. We can all share our stories and our backgrounds, where we're coming from. And I think communication can really lead to the reduction or elimination of biases, because we can all come away with a better understanding of each other, rather than if there's only one or two different ethnicities at the table talking on behalf of everyone. So I agree. I think we need to expand the table, expand the seats at the table, instead of just choosing who deserves a spot and who doesn't.
And I think you can't go forward by starting to exclude other people. So, okay, now we're going to exclude all the white males with disabilities. Okay, nope. That isn't the way to go forward. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, and also I've had these conversations a lot about giving up my seat at the table, which I have done many, many times. And people have said, no, bring more chairs to the table. I also want to just speak to people that are older and that have a legacy like me. I still think there are times when we do need to give our seat up at the table to make sure more diverse intersectional candidates are also they're also getting to speak. I think there are different ways that we can do that. That's one thing we're trying to figure it out, Billion Strong. But I do really think it's such a mistake to say, oh, Neil, you don't matter. Your voice doesn't matter. Now, you've been working, Neil, for 30 plus years, and you've had a major, major positive impact on our community. But now just be quiet, go sit down, don't add any word. That's stupid. It's stupid to do that. We have to consider all the intersections. As Ben was saying, and we've said many times on this show, the disability community is the largest minority community in the world, the largest. Maybe you can say women are larger, but that's ridiculous. Women are larger than men. But regardless, if we look at it from the intersectionalities, and let's not forget our LGBTQIA partners, any group of people that are being held back and oppressed should come together and support each other. So I think, there's so many things to look back and see that we've done wrong. And looking here in the States, Ben, you and I are here in the United States. I must say, I am really thrilled about the changes and the political presidency. I'm very pleased. I come out very clearly as a supporter of Kamala Harris. I hope we elect a woman of color, a woman of Indian descent. Anyway, but we are really, really struggling with this DEI. I had somebody say to me, my new partner said to me, Deborah, they're talking all over the news about this DEI stuff. What is that? And I thought, wow, apparently you haven't been listening to me for a little while. I said, that's what we do for a living. So making diversity, inclusion, and equity bad right now is startling. But at the same time, I think something that we had to do was we had to look at each of us and break us down in little parts and say, okay, Ben, all right, you identify as a male. Okay, you want to identify as somebody that's been adopted. You identify as somebody who was born in China, right? There's all these different pieces of you. Oh, neurodiverse and autistic too. I think we had to break us all down in little pieces, but now it's sort of time to put us all back together and to realize that being a human means that you have abilities, you have disabilities. Sometimes you're stronger at one thing, sometimes not. Sometimes you're brown, you're black, you're what. It is so ridiculous. We know how to make things accessible. We know how to fully include human beings. Stop putting your egos in front of everything, everybody, and make it about making the world a better place. It is so scary right now in the world. And I think we need these conversations, and we need to highlight leaders like you, Ben. That's what we do at Access Chat. We find who do we see that's making a difference, and we try to highlight what they're doing. But the people we're putting on here are also, y'all might notice to the audience, these are not selfish people. These are people like Neil and Antonio and like Ben that are saying, all right, I see it's a mess. While you're all complaining about it, get out of the way and we're going to try to make things better. I say it's time to join us. So, Ben, what do you think? Sorry.
I think it's important to really see what we're doing, see where the movement's heading, and also see just what different actually disabled people are saying about where they want to be in 5 years, 10 years. When I talk about disability, I usually use a timeline because people sometimes there are different benchmarks. If you look in the last 5 to 10 years, we could say we've gotten a lot done. We can say that we've had even the last 15 years, the Autism Cares Act was passed in 1970, 1980s, 1990s. We've had several legislations like the ADA, we've had IDEA. So there have been a lot of positive changes that have come to support the disabled community in the United States. But if you look at where we are at right now in 2024, given the research, given the resources, the technology, given many people coming out proudly as autistic, I would say that we're really far behind despite what we're doing, because where we should be in 2024 with so much at our disposal, I think the standards should be higher than just doing the bare minimum, to respect the human rights of disabled people. I think that we should by nature be respecting the human rights of all people. That shouldn't be something we celebrate. That should just be something that happens. But sometimes that's seen as something to celebrate. If you hire a disabled person, sometimes that's something you brag about, even though we should be hiring disabled people to begin with. So I think we need to raise our standards as society and look beyond the bare minimum. And I think that's one of the ways we can go beyond surviving to thriving as autistic people.
I love the fact that we need to go beyond bare minimum. I mean, spend most of my life trying to get beyond bare minimum, sometimes getting to bare minimum, frankly. It's a complex world. I think there was a group of what we'll maybe call the accessibility elders, Greg van der Heijden, please don't beat me up next time you see me, but they created a group called Raising the Floor, and that really just sums up what you were talking about, which is that people really only go to the bare minimum. So what do we need to do? We need to raise the expectation as to what the bare minimum is. I mean, I would love, some people do go beyond, but if we think about that, how organizations work, and there is an element of cynicism there, we need to raise that floor, because that's what most organizations will aim for by default, because they're satisficing.
Yeah, an example of that could be with accommodations. Organizations could like tout themselves as inclusive or like providing accommodations, but accommodations should be provided. Like that should be, because accommodations, at least the way I see accommodations, I see them as basic human rights. I see them as something that's essential for the function in a society that wasn't built for our needs in mind. So I think that by providing us with accommodations, organizations are just providing us with our basic human rights, what we need to survive in the workplace, nothing more than that. So I think we do need to raise the ceiling. I think we need to raise the floor as well. I think that we need to recognize that we can do so much more as a community if we're given the supports we need. And I think it's important that we raise the bar and raise the standard. A lot of disabled people, including myself, I'm also part of it. I have thanked people in the past for providing me with accommodations. And that's an example of how I myself have sometimes been stuck in this mentality of, oh, I should be thankful they're actually supporting me, when in reality, I should be expecting them to provide me these accommodations as a human being instead of just being grateful for being supported as a person.
Powerful.
No, I was reflecting in, we have been using the term community, okay? But at the same time, how we also find ways to welcome other people to be more engaged with us, and don't be afraid of talking or coming to us because they might made some mistake online when they use a certain word or when they engage in certain terms. And at the same time, also on that, how can we do a lot of events who are community driven in relation to accessibility and disability, but how we are able to find ways to get voices at other events, at other places, where usually people don't talk about the topics that are very close to our hearts.
So I can answer those one at a time. So for the first question about community, I think it can be really difficult, especially because I know quite a few others in the disability community have a lot of trauma, and we've oftentimes had a background of abuse, of bullying, of these negative experiences. So sometimes it can be really hard not to be triggered by a certain word or a certain phrase or perspective one might have. So it can be really difficult. It's something I'm still trying to learn myself. Like, how do I become more open-minded? How do I heal from my trauma so I can be the best advocate I can and welcome in people from our community and support our allies as well? How do I get into a position where I can trust our allies, have the best intentions in mind for our community? That's something I'm still trying to figure out myself. So I don't really have the best answer for that. For your second question, what was your second question again?
It's not. No, we do a lot of events who are focused in the topics that relate to our heart and focus in our community. But how we are able to break that ceiling and be more visible at places where usually diversity and inclusion are not discussed. I'm talking like technology events, other events that are not necessarily the usual places where we talk.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I think it's important that these different locations know the benefit of neurodiversity. And one of the ways we can really push that is by saying that your workplace might already be neurodiverse. Your workplace already probably has neurodivergent people working in it. So what we're talking about when it comes to disability actually matters when it comes to your current staff, when it comes to supporting your current staff members, future employees, because there are a lot of people in this country and in the world that go undiagnosed or go misdiagnosed, or they might not have the means to get a diagnosis in the first place. In the United States, 1 in 36 children are diagnosed as autistic in 2024, but that's likely an underestimate because of the amount of people who might be misdiagnosed, particularly females, because the symptoms present a bit differently within females and males. So I think it's important to really push to these employers that neurodivergent people are probably already working at your organization, and it's important to support neurodivergent people at your current workplace. I usually don't like using this example because I think we should really hire neurodivergent people anyways, but there is a business case for disability, and how about hiring a neurodivergent workplace? Workplaces are much more efficient. That's been shown by several studies. They're much more likely to engage in new practices. They're more likely to be innovative and have innovation. They're also more likely to be financially stable. Or neurodivergent workforces are more like associated with financial stability at different organizations. So there are benefits to the workplace when it comes to hiring neurodivergent people, but I usually don't like using that because I think we should, by nature of being human, be employable.
Excellent. All really valid points. I think that yes, sometimes you need to make financial arguments in business because they're there to make money. At the same time, you can cognitive diversity and diverse ways of thinking are supremely important because homogeneity and having everybody recruited for team fit, because everybody's the same, everyone looks the same, thinks the same, actually that causes groupthink, and groupthink was the thing that brought us to the edge of nuclear annihilation. It was groupthink that brought us the Bay of Pigs. So it goes beyond business, the need to have neuro-inclusive communities and everything else. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It'd be great if you can share the studies and so on. Maybe we can like develop the questions so you can share them as part of our Twitter chat as we bring that to social media. It remains for me to thank our friends and sponsors, Amazon and MyClearText, for keeping us on air and keeping us captioned. And thank you once again, Ben, for a great conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And I look forward to the Twitter chat. Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate this opportunity.
Wonderful.